Hello, wonderful bookish family, and welcome back to Coffee Over Apples. My name's Steph. Today's video is going to be a single book review for the thriller. We're going to get into what exact classification or genre this book is, but I was sent Just Get Home by Bridget Foley. Thank you so much to HarperCollins for sending me a copy of this book in exchange for an honest review. This is the stop on the book tour for the release of this book, and the release date is August 13th. There will not be any spoilers in this review, however, there will be some really dark topics discussed, and I will be going over the trigger warning list in a minute, so just be aware of that for this video. For this review, I decided to do a bookmark. I know that usually I do bookmarks for 5-star reviews only, and recently I decided that, you know what, if I had a good time with the book and it was something memorable, then I think I'm going to do a single book review for it. So if I decide to do a bookmark for it, that's fine. Otherwise, I might be doing a cooking review, so those won't just be reserved for 5-star and 1-star books anymore. So let's talk about Just Get Home. This book is basically set in the apocalypse mostly. There are moments where we're getting information as to what life was like before the apocalypse, but since the focus is an earthquake that hits Los Angeles, California, I decided to do the words of this bookmark looking like we're looking down at a street and there's cracks from the earthquake. The words themselves will look like they're made out of cracks from the earthquake and there's just disaster going on. So I thought this would be a really cool idea inspired by the book for the bookmark. So let's talk about what genre this book falls into and then the trigger warning list. So this book is essentially a thriller, a mystery thriller in a way. We're following two characters throughout the story, even though one of them is not introduced until like a little bit later, but there's a dual storyline here. We're following Jessa, who is a mother just out for a night on the town with her girlfriend. She left her daughter with a babysitter when the world basically ends, and there's a giant earthquake that destroys everything in LA. And we're also following the story of BG, who is, I want to say like 15 or 16-year-old African-American girl who has been bouncing from foster home to foster home, and she is on a bus when everything falls apart. Very quickly in this story do things start to get dark and really go downhill, even though there is dual storyline for a good first half of the book in which we're following Jessa in present day of the events leading up to this, and we're getting more backstory of BG, what happened to her, how she ended up on the bus, and what her life is like in foster home. Let's talk about the trigger warnings before I go into anything else, because this book was not advertised as a horror, but I think that Bridget Foley really pushed the envelope here as to what classifies as a mystery thriller, borderline horror. So I think that there's some horror aspects of this book because it gets much more dark than your average thriller, or at least in my experience with thrillers, which currently is not very much, but I do have more experience reading horror, and I would say that there are some things here that are seriously triggering, but things that I enjoy as a horror reader, which is why I kind of had a good time with it. So I would suggest that if you're not really into horror, then this might not be the book for you. But if you are looking for a really dark thriller, this has a lot of suspense, and I think you will enjoy this. I think this is going to be really enjoyable for a certain type of thriller reader. So the trigger warnings that I came up with for this book are rape, murder, violence, child abuse, and some serious use of ableist language. Now, this is not a spoiler, but it needs to be said. What makes this, in my opinion, more of a thriller leaning into the horror genre is because there's a specific kind of horror genre in which horrible things happen, horrible things that are completely plausible and happen, unfortunately, every day somewhere around the world. And it's really common for horrible actions to go unchecked, for people to be really dislikable, for just really bad things to happen, and there is no consequence to them. And that happens a lot in this book. So be prepared to see some really, really messed up things happen on page, and be prepared to be in a world where you don't know who you're going to be rooting for, just because things go downhill, like I said, really, really, really fast. As an avid horror reader, I actually don't mind when things kind of go unchecked, simply because this specific kind of book, from what I understand of this horror subgenre, is exploring the deepest, darkest crevices of humanity that we ignore and pretend aren't there but still exist. And that comes with facing some really dark things that happen. So be aware of that going into this book. But if you're the kind of reader who enjoys that kind of horror, I think that you'll enjoy this. The last time that I experienced reading something like this was like Blood Meridian. And this is like a lighter version of that. And if you've seen my other video on talking about Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, that's another book that really talks about like the deepest, darkest crevices of humanity that we just wish didn't existed. That same concept happens here, but on a much different aspect. So I ultimately ended up giving this 3.75 stars. I thought it was a good time. Something that I'm learning about myself as a reader is I don't know whether yet I need someone to root for. And there are certain characters here that you think you know, but you might not really know, and you get more information about who these characters really are as the story progresses. There's a lot of different scenarios introduced, such as, what would you do when the world ended? If the world ended right now, what would your priority be? Would it be going to your family? Would it be relocating? Would it be saving your items? Would it be helping other people around you who are trying to survive or maybe stuck under the rubble? What would you do? What is the right answer? And there's no right answer, because this is something extremely difficult to deal with. If you've ever been in any kind of disaster of any kind, which unfortunately I can say that I have, I think that this book is pretty spot on with that. It's really, it happens so fast. The focus of the story, though, is just trying to get home and what the meaning of home is. What does home mean when yours has been upended and destroyed? What does home mean when you have no one to go home to? Or what does home mean when you're not sure if the people that you think comprise your home may no longer exist? I can see this being a really good audiobook. There were so many moments where I honestly thought that the main character wasn't going to make it, and that we were going to switch to like a different kind of point of view, or I'm not even sure what I thought was going to happen, but I honestly didn't think that anyone was going to make it. This is kind of a very high stakes situation. Now, I do need to say that in times of disaster, it's not just the evil in people that comes to the surface. There's a lot of good that comes to the surface as well. So if you do decide to read this, be aware that the representation of personalities and reactions of individuals involved with this event is focusing on a very selective point of view, a very selective group of people, and a very selective portion of society and humanity's decisions. So just be aware of that going into it, because when you're in an actual disaster, there are people who do want to help. There are people who are looking out for each other. There are neighbors that come together. There are neighborhoods that have each other's back, that pool their resources together, that go around providing assistance. And as I said, I can testify to that. But this book focuses on the dark aspects of humanity. Along the way, you might find that some characters' decisions are very questionable, but give it time. And I feel like as you learn more about those individuals' values, those individuals' personal decisions, those individuals' life decisions, that everything will kind of come together as to how these characters ended up in the situations that they're in. The only reason that I brought my rating down to a 3.75, which I'm technically putting in as it's between a 3 and a 4, but what brought down my rating just a little bit was the fact that it took me a little longer to really get into the story, because it spends quite a bit of time setting things up. But like I said, when the disaster strikes, it really, really strikes. Thank you once again to HarperCollins Publishing for sending me a copy of this book in exchange for an honest review. I hope that you guys like this drawing that I did for the speed drawing and this bookmark. Let me know if you enjoy this kind of content. If you would like to support me and my channel, I have a Ko-fi and a GoFundMe down below to fund my college excursions that are coming up. I post videos every week, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!